Hi, I'm Jacqueline Coates. Welcome to Paint Blooms. I'm going to talk about acrylic paints. Acrylic paints is my choice for teaching because it's a great paint to use at home. I understand that a lot of my students painting from home don't have a separate studio away from family. Oil paints are fabulous too, but they can be a little bit stinky with the mediums you've got to use with them, and they don't dry as quickly. So my suggestion is use acrylics because they dry quickly, you can correct your mistakes super quickly, and they're very forgiving as a medium for the beginning artist. I've got some paintings hanging here in my gallery, and I just was having a look a few minutes ago. I've got an acrylic painting hanging up right next to the oil painting, and I'm looking at it thinking, you know what, I can't tell really which is which. If I didn't know which one I had painted with oils, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Acrylic paints were developed in the 1950s, and oil paints have been around for a couple of hundred years and more. So, you know, one of them is longer established and has had more time to develop. But with developments in technology and the pigments that are used, you're completely safe to use acrylic paint. So when we paint in my e-lessons, I use 2 levels of acrylics. So if you're on a budget and you're just looking to get started and you're not ready to make a big investment in your paints, I completely understand. Don't worry, just buy the student range quality, but buy a student range that's going to do your work justice. It's not actually the paint that's the expensive component. Your time is the most important commodity we have here. We're all time poor. So you do want to get reasonable quality paints. In Australia, I'm using Reeves. They're $5.95 a tube, and they've got 36 colours. So a lot of the mixing of the colours has been done for you. And they're all the same price across the board, no matter what the colour. So they're really great, and they'll do the job for you if you're on a budget. And the other one that I use is Winsor & Newton. This is a professional quality artist paint, and they are the best out there just for the simple reason that they have a clear resin and high quality pigments. So what that means for us is that they dry the same as they look when they're wet. A lot of acrylic paints have the issue that when you paint them, and this has been the big contest about which is better, oils or acrylics in the past, that the acrylics, when they're wet, look fabulous. You go away to have a cup of tea, you come back and the painting has dried, and you think, oh, what happened to those brilliant colours I had? And that's because when the paint dries, it doesn't look as brilliant as when it did when it was wet and luscious. So the Winsor & Newton are an exception to that. They use a clear resin rather than something that's got particles in it, like all the other brands do. They've had a breakthrough in technology, and they really do a lot of work in the lab, constantly developing these and making them fantastic. And wish I had shares in the company because it's a great paint. So basically when they dry, the light bounces through that clear resin and bounces out again. So you do get people saying, oh, Golden's the best, and Liquitex is really good. And they're great paints as well. If you've got them, use them up. No problem. You can actually mix your different ranges. You can paint that alongside that on your palette, and you can have Golden alongside Winsor & Newton or Atelier or whatever you've got. So don't feel bad if you've still got existing ranges but you want to swap over. You can use all those paints up, no problem. So yeah, but the thing about the Winsor & Newton is it does just beat them all on that one thing, that they've got the clear resin and they dry the same as they look when they're wet. Now, if you've got other paints that don't have that lovely clear resin, they're not a Winsor & Newton, what we can do is we can bring the painting back to life at the end by putting a clear varnish over it. And I tend to use the Winsor & Newton gloss varnish for that, which is a lovely clear. And I'll demonstrate that at some point for you. So that's what we have for the paints. Now, I just want to talk a little bit more about the paints so you know what you're buying. When you buy a student quality paint, you'll get a colour that says cobalt blue hue or cerulean blue hue. When they say the word hue, they mean that they've matched what a true cerulean is or a true cobalt is, but it doesn't mean it's the actual pigment. Whereas a professional range, they're going to give you that option to use the true pigment. So they'll have cobalt blue, which is actually cobalt blue, or cerulean blue, which is actually cerulean blue. And in the Winsor Newton range, they also have options that are less expensive but very close, and they'll have cerulean blue hue also, or cerulean blue chromium. Two other options that are cheaper than using the full whack. The other difference about the professional quality paints as opposed to the students, these are all the same price in the student range. When we come to the Winsor Newton professional ranges and many other professional ranges, you're paying on the basis of how much the pigment cost. So for example, if it says series 3, it's going to be about middle of the range in price. Series 1 is going to be the cheapest. That tends to be your earth tones like gold, probably burnt umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna, those sorts of colours tend to be around the number 1. And then series 2 tends to be things like Payne's Grey, very handy colours, and lovely, deep and rich, very handy in your palette. And then you get to series 3, and they're usually all the colours that you actually want and need, and they are around $18.40 Aussie dollars at the moment. I think paint's a lot cheaper in America than it is for us in Australia. It's something to do with import duties. So if you're looking for Winsor & Newton in America, it's under Dick Blick. Online you can get them, and the prices are really good. And you know, I have box sets of these. If you want to contact me, I can send them out in Australia, and I've also got box sets of these. Bearing in mind, I understand you've got a budget and you don't want to necessarily buy the whole range, so I supply a fantastic free color exercise with each of those boxes, so you know how to work those paints and turn your set into hundreds more colors. So yes, then you get to series 4, it starts to get a bit more expensive. I think they're $27-ish, or maybe $31 I think in Aussie dollars, so series 4, and that's your specialized colors such as quinacridone gold, perylene violet, which is a very, very handy, beautiful, beautiful deep purpley black. And what else do I use in the series 4? The perylene green is an extremely dark green. So in the professional range, they really go to a lot of trouble to get the richest, darkest, beautiful pigments, the most vibrant pigments. So for example, Winsor & Newton actually spend money on developing and researching their pigments. Perylene is a color that's been used in the car industry for proofing the cars against solar fade. So for example, the perylene is a pigment that's used on car Duco, because if you've got a car sitting out in the sun, for example, and you want a really beautiful dark green on the Duco. You see a lot of those cars that from the 50s sitting in fields with daisies growing through them, and you can see that those colours were once rich and now they're not. Well, they've developed pigments over time that are man-made compounds, and they're used in industry, and Winsor & Newton has been clever enough to hook up with industry and the latest developments and say, you know what, that would be awesome for the artists as well. So yeah, they've got all that sort of competitive advantage as well. Whereas you're going to get pretty much standard stock colours, not necessarily the best pigments, quite a lot of fillers in the student range. But having said that, there's lots of colours that I like to use alongside my professional quality paints, and here are some of them. I like the pale powder blue, and I use these in place of white sometimes. Pale lemon yellow hue. They used to call this flesh, it's currently called peach. Medium grey, and the Naples yellow. So, you know, they're really handy, as well as all the beautiful bright colours that they've got. Now, I'm just going to show you what a beautiful thick pigment from Winsor & Newton does. Let's have a look. So come in a bit closer. Now, whenever I'm going to get some paint out, I've always got some paper towel as well. I'm going to damp the brush. I'm not going to twizzle the whole thing. I don't want all the water running down there. So I do that, tamp it. Okay, it's wet enough to go. And for the purposes of what we're doing, I'm just going to put a little bit of this paint here. And I'm going to do that. You can see how as it gets more white behind it, it's really quite brilliant. This is the professional quality, and it's the quinacridone violet. So it's really a bit of a go-to pink. And here it is if I mix it with a bit of white, just at the edge there. And here it is if I mix in a bit more of the pink. Okay, so just pop over with me to the stand, the paint stand. We'll go and grab a pink, and I'll show you what the paint looks like on the stands. Come over. So you can see the Winsor & Newton here has got like 36 colours. It's got loads of colours. We'll take a pink and I'll show you what their pink is like. And here's the Winsor & Newtons over here. And obviously the tubes are smaller, but the pigment really packs a punch. So it goes a long way. It's going to go a long way for you. But I want to show you the difference now with the student range one. So you can see how rich and lovely that is. Now I'm going to wipe off the excess, give it a twizzle, so that I'm not mixing those pigments. I just want to show you the difference. Here's a little bit of the Reese. Now, the Reese, you can already tell, is not as deep as that. So I'm never going to be able to get this deeper just out of the tube. You can see how it gets quite thin. There's a lot of medium in it, and it's got a translucency to it. This is also regarded as what they call a translucent paint. It's got loads of fine particles. But you can see the coverage is going to be, it's not quite as good as the professional. So there you go. Here it is, mixing it with some of the other colours. Yeah, the intensity, as you can see, it's not quite as rich as it. I'm just not going to be able to get the deep that I can get with that. With the professional quality. So that's essentially the difference, that you know, you give one thing up for price, and this is where I say you just got to ask yourself, like, maybe get your whole range of student range pinks first. Once you get your confidence up with your painting and you're ready to invest a little bit more, go and buy all the reds and pinks in the Winsor & Newton. Add to your greens when you're ready. You can just do that gradually if you want, and that's a really great way to go. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about with the acrylic paints, and thanks for joining me.